Oklahoma teaches you to watch the grass. That's the first lesson anybody learns here, whether they grew up on a section of red dirt outside Ardmore or moved in from somewhere flatter and safer. You watch the grass because that's where the copperhead waits, coiled into the exact color of a dead leaf, patient in a way that feels almost personal. You watch the woodline because that's where the timber rattler holds its ground instead of running, daring you to notice it before your boot does. Snake country trains a particular kind of vigilance, downward and outward, eyes on the tall grass and the stacked stone, and the places where a body might be lying still, waiting for you to get close enough to be a mistake. Ask anyone from Pottawatomie County or out past Paul's Valley, and they'll tell you the same thing without having to think about it. You learn to read a woodpile the way you'd read a stranger's face. You learn which rock ledges hold the morning sun long enough for a snake to want them. You learn the particular stillness of tall grass that isn't just wind moving through it. This knowledge gets passed down casually, almost without anyone deciding to teach it, the way you'd learn which gate sticks or which low spot floods first after a hard rain. It is knowledge earned honestly, and none of it is wrong. It is simply pointed in a direction that turns out not to matter nearly as much as everyone assumes. It is, by every measure that matters to the state's emergency rooms, the wrong kind of vigilance. Because while Oklahomans have spent generations perfecting the art of not stepping on something coiled, the animal actually filling hospital beds with tissue damage nobody can quite explain has never coiled at anything. It doesn't ambush from a woodpile bank or bask on a warm rock, waiting to be startled. It lives inside the house. It has probably lived inside several of your houses, at several points in your life, in places you reached into without looking, because nothing about those places suggested you needed to look. The brown recluse does not want to be found, and Oklahoma provides it with an almost unreasonable number of places to avoid being found in. Start with the numbers nobody argues about, because there aren't many. Oklahoma sits near the geographic center of the brown recluses confirmed range, a swath of the country running roughly from Texas up through the lower Midwest, where Loxosceles reclusa isn't a rare find, but a background fact of rural and even suburban life. Pull apart a stack of cardboard boxes that sat in a garage since the last move, and there's a real chance one is in there. Reach behind a dresser that hasn't moved since a previous owner lived in the house. Pull on a boot that's been sitting in the back of a closet since spring. The recluse favors exactly these spaces. Dark, undisturbed, close to the ground, rarely touched by human hands until suddenly they are. Compare that to the encounter profile of a copperhead, which is Oklahoma's most commonly reported venomous snake bite. A copperhead bite typically happens outdoors, typically to a hand or foot, typically because someone stepped near it, reached into brush near it, or otherwise entered its territory in a way that gave the snake a reason to react. The bite is immediate, visible, and unmistakable in origin. You know exactly what happened, you know approximately when it happened, and within minutes you are already moving toward help, because the pain alone makes waiting unthinkable. Oklahoma hospitals see these bites every warm season, and anti-venom protocols exist specifically because the pattern is so well understood. Painful, serious, occasionally requiring real medical intervention, but rarely fatal and rarely mysterious. The recluse bite follows almost the opposite pattern, and that difference is where the actual danger hides. A recluse bite is frequently painless at the moment of contact, or close enough to painless that it registers as nothing more than a faint pinch, if it registers at all. There's no coil to see, no rattle to hear, no immediate and undeniable cause. Hours pass. Sometimes most of a day passes. Then a small red mark begins to change into something else. A blister, a spreading firmness under the skin, a color shift that doesn't look like ordinary inflammation. By the time it's clearly wrong, the moment of the actual bite is already a vague memory, if it's a memory at all. Some people never identify a bite moment whatsoever. They simply notice one morning that a patch of skin on their calf or forearm has become something they don't recognize. This is where the venom itself does something snake venom in Oklahoma does not typically do. Recluse venom contains an enzyme called sphingomyelinase D, and its function is essentially architectural, breaking down the structural components of tissue at the cellular level, disrupting cell membranes, and setting off a cascade that can kill the surrounding tissue outright. The result, in a meaningful minority of bites, is necrosis, a wound that doesn't heal like a wound, that widens instead of closing. That can leave a crater of dead tissue requiring weeks of wound care, or, in the more severe documented cases, surgical debridement to remove the dead material and let the surrounding skin have a chance at recovering. Copperhead venom causes real tissue damage too, and real pain, but it does not, as a rule, produce months of open necrotic wound care from a bite the patient never saw coming. So there's a clean explanation sitting right there. And for a while it looks like the whole story. Snakes are visible and treatable. Spiders are invisible and slow acting. Case closed, coil watched, wrong animal feared. Tidy, satisfying, wrong or at least not proven, which in this state amounts to about the same thing, except that explanation doesn't survive contact with how these cases actually get diagnosed. And this is where the story stops being clean. Ask an emergency physician in Oklahoma how many confirmed recluse envenomations they've treated, and you'll often get a pause before the answer, because confirmed is doing enormous work in that question. Unlike a snake bite, where the animal is frequently identified, described, sometimes even brought in a jar, a recluse bite is almost never diagnosed by seeing the spider. It's diagnosed by the wound. A necrotic lesion with no clear cause gets labeled a probable recluse bite by pattern recognition alone, because there's no venom test run in routine practice, and the spider itself is rarely caught in the act. That diagnostic shortcut has a serious blind spot, a wide range of other conditions, most notably certain bacterial skin infections, including drug-resistant staph, produce lesions that look remarkably similar in early stages. Multiple wound care studies over the years have found that a significant share of presumed recluse bites, when actually investigated, turn out to be something else entirely, an infection with no spider involved at all. There's a reason that shortcut is so easy to reach for, and it has to do with a problem almost nobody outside pest control circles thinks about. Most people cannot actually identify a brown recluse. It is a small, unremarkable tan to brown spider without the dramatic markings people expect a dangerous animal to advertise. Its most reliable feature, a dark violin-shaped mark on the upper body, is subtle enough that half the spiders, confidently labeled recluses in kitchens and garages across the state, turn out on closer inspection to be something else entirely. A wolf spider passing through, a cellar spider that has never bitten anyone in its life, a grass spider that wandered in from the porch light. Compare that to a copperhead, which is essentially unmistakable to anyone who has spent a season outdoors here, its hourglass banding recognizable at a glance, even to people who couldn't name another snake in the state. Oklahomans have a near universal fluency in identifying the snake they fear, and a near universal illiteracy in identifying the spider they fear more. That gap does not make the recluse less real. It makes almost every claim about it, in casual conversation and sometimes in a clinic, considerably less reliable than it sounds. Confidence and accuracy are not the same thing, and this is a state that has never once let that stop it from being confident, which means Oklahoma's spider problem might be two separate things being counted as one. Some of it is real, documented, tissue-confirmed loxoscelism from an actual bite. Some of it is misattribution, an infection getting blamed on a shy brown spider because the wound looks the part and the spider makes a tidier story than a lab culture. Nobody currently separates those two categories with confidence, statewide. The result is a number that feels enormous and might be somewhat inflated, sitting next to a snakebite number that's small but rock solid, and the comparison between them is less certain than either side wants to admit. That should be troubling enough on its own. It isn't the only complication. If you've had a wound like this yourself, or watched a neighbor go through the slow argument with a doctor over what actually caused it, say where you're writing in from. Half the counties in this state seem to disagree with the other half about how often this actually happens, and nobody's put the map together properly yet, because even setting the misdiagnosis question aside, there's a second layer underneath it, and it has to do with what a recluse bite can do beyond the skin. In the rare but real severe cases, Loxosceles goes systemic. The venom's breakdown of cell membranes isn't limited to the skin at the bite site. In a small number of documented cases, particularly in children, it has triggered a systemic reaction involving the destruction of red blood cells, a condition called hemolysis, along with fever, and, in the most severe outcomes, kidney damage from the burden of processing that cellular debris. These systemic cases are genuinely uncommon, but they represent a category of harm that Oklahoma's copperhead bites essentially do not produce. A copperhead envenomation, treated appropriately, resolves. It does not, as a rule, threaten kidney function days after the bite from an entirely separate physiological cascade. What makes the systemic cases especially hard to plan around is the delay built into them. Unlike a snake bite, where the danger window is measured in hours, and everyone involved knows exactly when the clock started, a systemic reaction to a recluse bite can announce itself days after the original contact, once the local tissue damage has already been quietly feeding waste products into the bloodstream. A child who seemed only mildly unwell on the day of the bite can present later in the week with a fever that doesn't track to any obvious infection until someone finally connects it back to a mark on the leg that had already started to look better. There is no equivalent lag with a copperhead. Whatever a copperhead is going to do to a person, it does quickly and it does visibly. Whatever the recluse is capable of doing can still be arriving after the wound itself has stopped being the most interesting part of the story. So which is it? Is the brown recluse actually the more dangerous animal, carrying a rare capacity for systemic harm that no commonly encountered Oklahoma snake possesses? Or is the entire reputation partly an artifact of diagnostic guesswork, a spider getting blamed for wounds it never caused because nobody wants to admit an infection went unchecked? Or is the real answer somewhere stranger than either of those, that the danger was never really about venom potency at all, and everyone arguing about toxicology is missing the actual mechanism? Because there's a third read of this, and it's the one that actually holds up once you stop arguing about toxicology and start paying attention to real estate. It has to do with where the animal lives and who it lives next to without either of them noticing. A copperhead requires you to enter its space. You have to walk into the brush, reach into the woodpile, step near the creek bank at dusk. The encounter has a location, a decision point, a moment where a different choice avoids it. A recluse requires nothing like that from you. It has already entered your space, months ago, behind a box you haven't opened, inside a boot you haven't worn, in the dark, undisturbed folds of a house you sleep in every night. The bite, when it happens, often happens while a person is sleeping or getting dressed or reaching into storage without a second thought, encounters with zero warning, zero decision point, and frequently zero memory of contact at all. The danger isn't that the recluse is more aggressive or more toxic, ounce for ounce, than a snake defending its ground. The danger is that it has already been granted access. Nobody gave it permission for, sharing a bedroom or a closet for weeks at a time without either party registering the other. Whatever this animal actually is, medically, it has solved a problem the snake never had to solve. It never needs you to make a mistake. It only needs you to stop looking somewhere for long enough. Oklahoma's poison control system fields these calls constantly. Spider bite reports far outnumbering snake envenomation calls across a typical warm season, and there is still no statewide effort to run confirmed spider identification against wound outcomes at any real scale. Nobody has definitively separated the true bites from the misdiagnosed infections. Nobody has mapped whether the systemic reactions cluster somewhere specific, some quirk of humidity or population density or building age that would explain why certain counties report disproportionately more severe cases than others. The state simply carries the reputation forward year after year, spider more dangerous than snake, without the underlying data to say precisely why or how much of that reputation is earned versus inherited. Compare that silence to how thoroughly the state tracks its snake bites. Envenomation from a venomous snake triggers a fairly standardized response almost everywhere in Oklahoma: identification where possible, observation, anti-venom administration when indicated, a clear record of species, location, and outcome. That data exists because the encounter itself is unambiguous enough to document cleanly. The recluse never gets that treatment, not because anyone is negligent, but because the encounter refuses to hold still long enough to be measured. There is no moment of contact to log, no animal to bag and confirm, sometimes no bite site anyone can even say for certain came from a spider rather than a scrape that got infected on its own. An animal that cannot be reliably observed cannot be reliably counted, and an animal that cannot be reliably counted will always seem larger in the public imagination than an animal whose every encounter ends up on a chart somewhere. What's left, if you sit with it, is less a solved mystery than a shift in where the fear should be pointed, and even that shift is uncomfortable because it can't be fully justified by the numbers as they currently exist. Watching the grass was never wrong. The copperhead is real, and the timber rattler is real, and both deserve exactly the caution generations of Oklahomans have given them. But somewhere behind that vigilance, in the closet nobody's opened since last winter, in the garage boxes stacked since the last move, something smaller has been quietly living alongside people for longer than anyone kept track of, asking for nothing, announcing nothing, and leaving behind wounds that take weeks to explain and rarely one clean answer. This is not a pattern unique to Oklahoma, and that's part of what makes it worth sitting with. The same quiet reversal shows up wherever a visible predator and an invisible one share the same ground. Wherever the animal people were taught to fear turns out to be the one that announces itself, and the animal that actually does the damage is the one that never had to. Fear, it turns out, is not especially good at tracking actual risk. It tracks visibility. It tracks drama. It tracks the coiled shape in the grass, because the mind is built to flinch from shapes, not from statistics, and certainly not from something that has been sitting motionless behind a stack of boxes for 3 months without asking to be noticed. The grass was never the blind spot. The house was. Every state seems to be carrying some version of this same blind spot, its own animal everyone's watching for the wrong reasons. If your county has its own argument about this one, the kind that gets settled at the feed store and never quite the same way twice, say so below. This channel exists to track that pattern state by state, so subscribe if you want the next one when it's confirmed.